Welcome to OCD Behind the Scenes, a podcast brought to you by OCDMidwest.org. I'm your host, Marty McGovern, a practicing psychotherapist at Wellington Counseling Group in the Chicagoland area. And today we are speaking with Tamara Hubbard, a licensed clinical professional counselor trained in family therapy and a thought leader in the food allergy community as the founder of the Academy of Food Allergy Counseling. In today's conversation, we discuss the nuances between food allergy anxieties and food-related OCD, the complex nature of social media misinformation in the digital age, and what you can do to reduce binary thinking in order to increase your autonomy and not let anxiety run your life. Learn more about Tamara by going to foodallergycounselor.com or checking out her work at tamarahubbardlcpc.com. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Tamara Hubbard. Welcome to OCD Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Marty, and today we are talking to Tamara Hubbard. Tamara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very excited to chat with you. As we kick things off here, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
So, I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, but my degree is actually in marriage and family therapy. So, I think very much like a family systems thinker when I do all of my individual work. I'm licensed in Illinois, also able to do telehealth work in Florida, and I have a solo private practice. But I've been in the field for 20 plus years. I've gone through all of the experiences many of us in the field have probably had: inpatient, outpatient hospital settings, community health. I've worked with teens. I've done family therapy. I've done couples therapy. And now my practice is primarily focused on working with women to help them through the transitions and stress and anxiety of life, and then helping parents, usually moms of children with food allergies, get through the stress and anxiety they're feeling.
Yeah, the stress and anxiety, that's what tends to get people seeking out information online, right? And maybe they've
Yeah.
come across this podcast.
Yeah.
As you think about the types of stressors that people are encountering that brings them into your office, what are maybe like the common things that get them over that hump from just dealing with it at home to coming in for help?
Well, I think what gets them over the hump is, whatever coping strategies they have at home that are working, and then suddenly maybe the stressor's too big or the situation gets bigger and they can't cope anymore. And so they go online and they search through all the directories or they search therapist for blah, blah, blah. And then a lot of times, my work in the food allergy community has been, almost a decade long. So there's a lot of information out there about me doing work with food allergies and food allergy counseling. And so people stumble upon me very easily in that niche, and then usually reach out even if they're not in the states in which I can help them. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I know, right? The boundaries.
Yes, we're just trying to help people and they're not helping us help you. So, yeah,
We try, we try.
we try. Yeah.
And one of the things that I think when it comes to food allergies, that is a really interesting area that sort of overlaps with the work that's being done with OCD Midwest is this concept around hypervigilance. And I'm
Yep.
curious what your experience with hypervigilance is. Maybe you can define it and kind of give us a couple examples of what hypervigilance looks like in your patients.
Yeah, so hypervigilance is essentially just really focused attention on something. It could be physical sensations in the body. It could be hypervigilance related to the anxiety and worry you're experiencing, hypervigilance to perceived threats and fears in the environment around you. As it relates to families with food allergies, either the kiddos or adults managing the food allergy and the parents of the kids or teens with food allergies, which is who I primarily work with. That looks like overestimating risk and underestimating their ability to be able to navigate that risk safely. It could be anything from my heart is racing. Is this an allergic reaction that I'm experiencing because maybe I was in a new environment or I tried a different brand of food? To, hey, we're at the park and I'm noticing that somebody over there is eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or having milk to drink, and that's my child's allergens. And so now I'm incredibly focused on it, hyper vigilant about it, hyper focused, and incredibly scared and fearful about it.
Yeah, and have you noticed that fears around allergies have been increasing over the years? What's been the trend?
This is an interesting conversation that a lot of us in the field have. So I have a big network of allergy-informed clinicians that I talk with, mainly because I've kind of I've created the Academy of Food Allergy Counseling, which is kind of trying to bring this niche together and formalize it. But I also have a lot of allergist friends in the field and physician's assistants and nurse practitioner friends who do this work too. And the thing that we've been noticing that I think might be increasing, well, it's not might, it is increasing fear levels and intensity and frequency is social media. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, like I think many of us do. I'm on there professionally,
Hmm.
so it's not like I avoid it, but with the rise of influencers and people who are not trained clinicians, not trained medical healthcare professionals, giving guidance and information and insight on social media, or just sharing their stories, which don't get me wrong, can be helpful. Those anecdotal stories and tips for how to navigate life easier with food allergies can be useful. But I think a lot of people hear those things and they immediately take that to heart and then use it as guidance, and that can be really misleading and it can actually increase anxiety and fear.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you have to dispel when people come in with their social media research?
So, one of the big ones that typically triggers parents to become really afraid and seek therapy out, especially at times of transition, like new ages and stages, going to school, going to college, is this fear, obviously, this fear of anaphylaxis, which is an extreme allergic reaction, and death. I mean, that's the ultimate fear when it comes to potentially life-threatening food allergies, is death, right? So, whenever a story comes out about somebody who has passed in the food allergy community due to allergic reaction relating to food, that panic kind of that cycle starts all over again. And even if somebody who has already started, learned how to manage that anxiety around, this death fear, when they hear these stories, it can send them right back to the beginning of that cycle. And it's a tough one. I'm not going to lie. It's very hard to read those stories and then unhook yourself from those intrusive thoughts about, I'm afraid I'm going to die or my child's going to die.
Yeah, and especially because social media will give you more of what you click on or engage with. So if
Right.
you watch that whole video, you'll get even more videos of things that,
Yep.
oh man, the
Yeah.
the the cycle's endless.
Yeah, and usually when I tell whether it's my clients or the community if I'm speaking, those stories when they first come out lack a lot of information. They lack a lot of details, and so there's a lot of guessing, generalization, wondering, missing information, and so that's important to keep in mind. And also, we need to create boundaries. If we're feeling very anxious already about food allergies, maybe it's not a good idea for us to really engage in those stories. At least not without discussing that with maybe our healthcare providers, our allergists, our therapists.
And so what are good boundaries in a space like this? Because, it is one of those things where, if someone's scared of snakes, they just stay away from snakes, but food's
Yeah,
everywhere, right? And
food's
so
everywhere.
how do we create boundaries in a fear that is so omnipresent?
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference. When we think about OCD and we think about, this idea of are these fears rational or irrational? And that is one thing I like to hammer home to everybody. A fear of a food allergic reaction is not an irrational fear. It's a very rational fear because in all honesty, it's possible. Now, it, fatal reactions, the stats are very low. Even in higher risk populations like the teens and young adults who are blossoming into their own world and maybe not taking as many precautions as their parents had taken for them years before. So I think I want to establish first that it's not an irrational fear. But to your point, food is part of our everyday existence multiple times a day. And then beyond that, social experiences too, work experiences. So, some of the important boundaries to have is to obviously understand your food allergy. Unfortunately, a lot of the medical appointments that people have are very short. And so we can't get a lot of conversation and discussion in those appointments. So I'll encourage people to create a list of questions or concerns and then set up a consultation appointment with their providers, their allergists. And I think that's tip number one, to create safe boundaries that are based on medical necessity and not our fear of what could happen. We need to really understand the facts around food allergies, what really is a risk. I will tell people to talk with their allergist about determining and helping them determine what is safe, safe enough, and not safe with allergens. So there's a range of safety, and I think that's a boundary a lot of people with food allergies have a hard time accepting. It's usually either all unsafe or totally safe. And that certainty piece, which I know, is a thread through OCD work too, is a tough one as well because there is no certainty.
Right. Oh my goodness. That certainty and uncertainty and the
Yeah.
black and white binary thinking is
Yeah.
such a huge piece. And it's one of those things where trying to get from that binary thinking to a more nuanced perspective, you know, information takes us part of the way,
Yeah.
but getting over or understanding it on a intellectual level versus understanding it on an emotional level are two very different things. How have you seen
Very
that developing in your work?
Yeah, very different. Well, I see a lot of times again, I should mention, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, I'm not only a therapist, but I'm also a parent of a child with a peanut allergy. And that's how I
Oh
got
yeah.
into this work. So I live this on a daily basis. And even as a therapist who understands this and does this work, I sometimes am struggling with my own anxiety about this. My son is 16. He's going to college in a couple years. That's a very different life experience that I've been having the last 16 years.
Hmm.
So, quite honestly, what I find is that a lot of times we're in our heads about this, right? Just like you said, we're intellectualizing, we're trying to think our way through the food allergy anxiety. And that is helpful, don't get me wrong. But what happens usually is that that helpful, manageable, adaptable part of anxiety crosses that line into the unhelpful, debilitating levels of anxiety that then lead to actions that become more like restrictive, which sound familiar in the OCD world. Restrictive actions where over avoiding experiences, over avoiding food and food groups that are deemed safe enough, but that we're just fearing and we're letting that anxiety in our mind, the thinking piece, determine our actions. So, what I like to help people focus on is turn those emotional goals of I want to be less anxious about food. I want to not have food allergy anxiety, which would be wonderful. And I wish I could provide that to them. I can't. And turn them into behavioral goals, right? So we're going to work on, even if we feel anxious, how do we determine what's safe, safe enough, not safe? And then do little exposure work to those
Hmm.
feared experiences. Now, what I'll say about exposure work, because I think this is an important point, for therapists in the food allergy counseling niche or working with families with food allergies, and on the flip side, families who go to therapy who are managing food allergy anxiety, therapists, at least in private practices, are typically not doing any kind of exposure to allergen work, direct exposure to allergen work. Any work related to that, in my opinion, is best done in a clinic or in collaboration with allergists and healthcare providers.
Hmm.
There are things like proximity challenges where families can actually be near and maybe sniff their allergen if it's appropriate and safe enough for them. And they can learn that being around their allergen is safe. So when their mind tries to tell them that's not safe, they can say, hang on a minute, we've done that and that's okay. But in therapy, like in my practice, I might be working on exposure work where it's more like we're afraid to go eat out at all. And so I've had my clients and the families check with their allergist what's safe, safe enough, and not safe. So we know those boundaries medically for their family. And then we apply that and we start to work towards, hey, anxiety is not going to tell us how to live our life. These boundaries are going to help us live a better life.
I love that phrase. Anxiety is not going to tell us how to live our lives.
Yep.
Um, So you mentioned something a little bit earlier and then shared your own personal experience with that transition from youth to adult or going off to college and the anxiety that can create in the parents.
Hmm.
What Share a little bit more about your experience with that as well as things that maybe you've seen in clients and what does come up during those transitional periods where it goes from the parent taking care of everything to having to, leave the nest and figure it out on their own.
Which is hard enough without food allergies, let's be
Yes.
honest. But you add in food allergies and allergic conditions, or any health condition or mental health condition, and it adds complexity to it. One of the things I discuss in a major chapter in my upcoming book, May Contain Anxiety, is all throughout the food allergy parenting journey, there's multiple developmental processes happening at the same time. There's the child's normal development through the years, there's the parent's development of becoming a parent and then adjusting their positioning during that process. And then there's that food allergy or allergic disease management process. And all three of those things have to be in the mind of the parent or the family as they go through their whole journey from infant to adulthood. A lot of times, because we're really just focused on safety and over avoidance and what I call allergy parenting traps, we forget to balance all these things. And so as we get closer to those young adult and launching years, one of the hardest things that the parents struggle with, and I understand this intimately, is pulling back and letting the teens and the young adults actually practice some of these skills or practice these skills more than they had been when they were younger. Each stage of development, they need to be building their own skills. And at the same time, we need to be educating and then allowing opportunities for them to practice. And that is incredibly scary for allergy families because that intrusive thought of one mistake can cause death is on repeat most of the time.
Yeah. And I want to dig into the parenting piece here because it's come up in a number of conversations recently in around OCD and things like that as well, where, anytime I talk to someone who works with kids, they're like,
Yeah.
I'm helping the kid, but boy, the parents need help, right? And so it's like a fun little joke, but at the same time, it
Yeah.
is there are so many things when either the child has some sort of diagnosis or the parent has a diagnosis or both have different types of diagnoses
Mhm.
and trying to manage the interrelation of those two
Yeah.
things. And so, you mentioned parents pulling back. I mean, just in general, parents pulling back is hard, but you add in all these different layers of allergies or mental health disorders or a combination of all those different things. What are some of the practical ways people can get ready to pull back, even if they're not even at the point of fully pulling back? What are some exercises or exposure things that they can do to start to develop this ability?
Again, and this work can start in much younger ages, elementary school and beyond. Again, this is building skills so that hopefully by the time we're getting to the true pulling back, we trust that they have the basic skills they need and can develop those. But you can start as simple as something as going grocery shopping together and letting them check the labels and evaluate what's safe and not safe, right? Making sure that they're speaking up at restaurants and asking is this safe? Does this, include my allergen? Is it a cross contamination or cross, shared space with allergens back in the kitchen? Those kinds of questions. And then that also branches off into things like at medical appointments, having them speak up, letting them try to fill out the forms, understand how to refill their epinephrine devices, right? So it starts with teaching them how to do that modeling and then actually allowing them to do that. Now, those are kind of the things where, okay, that's safer. The more anxiety inducing things would be allowing them to go out with friends without you first calling and checking if the restaurant is safe, right? Asking them, how do you plan on handling that? And that's the kind of conversations I encourage parents to have, right? Let's be honest, teens don't like lecturing. They will tune you out. And again, I'm a family therapist, so I'm also paying attention to the family relationship, the parent-child relationship, which we want to come out intact on the other side of this. And so having a conversation where you're lecturing isn't going to be useful, but maybe posing some scenario-based questions and saying, hey, how do you think you might handle this? It's probably not going to be exactly how the parent would handle it because, again, we're going to go and be extremely avoidant of things probably, and then our child may not be quite as avoidant. But having those scenario-based questions is helpful. And then also just being honest with your child and saying, I need to see you build these skills so I can learn to trust that you can take care of yourself and then I can pull back some more. And
And
usually I say to kids, and kids, you want parents to pull back, don't you? So let's
yeah,
maximize
yeah,
that internal motivation, right? Yeah.
it is good to lean on that for sure. And
Yeah.
how do you sort of see it playing out in the overarching community? You hear stories of like parents getting annoyed at allergies when there's like potlucks or things at schools or things like that. Have you seen that changing? Is there more understanding, more community support around these things? What trends have you seen in the larger picture?
It's hit or miss. I do think overall there has been more of a general population understanding of food allergies. Maybe not intimately understanding what it's like to live with food allergies, but of course they wouldn't because they don't live in those shoes. So I do think overall the general knowledge and awareness of food allergy and food allergy management has come up. But every time something is out on social media, there was something recently where a young man in England had posted, and he's been on social media, advocating for food allergy safety. He himself has food allergies for years. And he posted a video recently of him asking an airline staff to, let them know that he had a food allergy, where his epinephrine auto injectors were kept. And I think on this airline, they'll make an announcement, a buffer announcement saying, please don't have, nuts. And he posted that and it went viral. And the comments are everything
Mm,
from, we totally understand, no problem not having nuts on this flight, to some pretty awful comments that are really personally, character assassination comments.
yeah.
So I think, yes, the awareness has grown, but there's still a lot of work to do in this area.
Yeah,
And
people
part
have
of that
really, yeah.
also, yeah, part of that is also helping families. Again, it's full circle. We want the community to understand, the general population to understand food allergies and the precautions people have to take and to please respect those. But we also want to make sure that families are not, again, over avoiding and creating excessive boundaries that are beyond medical guidance that are just based on reassuring their anxiety either, because that together, all together, makes everything much harder.
That's such a good distinction, especially with that safe enough, and unsafe thing that you said
Yep.
earlier. It's like getting that message out there that
Yep.
it's like, sure, there are certain things that you know, there are levels to all these things, basically.
Yeah.
Um, what are some of the misconceptions that you've come across that people who don't have closeness to folks with allergies? What are some of the things that you would wish that they would know as they're kind of going through the world blissfully unaware in a way of what other people are going through?
I think the number one misconception is that food allergies are not the same thing as food intolerances or sensitivities. They're extremely different. Food allergies, what we would call IgE mediated food allergies, the ones that may be life-threatening at high enough levels of ingestion, um, whenever somebody eats that, whatever their allergen or allergens are, they're going to have a systemic reaction potentially. That's where it could, and every time they eat it, it's not like sometimes they eat it and they feel unwell, right? Intolerances are just more, you'll tend to get like GI discomfort, you're bloated, it just doesn't agree with you. You might get headaches, these things might last for a few days. Food allergic reactions and IgE mediated food allergies, the reaction is within minutes to a couple of hours, and it's anywhere from mild to severe and anaphylactic, where multiple systems of the body are impacted and can start to shut down. And epinephrine is really the only line of treatment to stop that reaction from happening. So the level of danger is very different than just a little bit of discomfort. And I'm not downplaying food sensitivities and intolerances. Any kind of food or dietary based diagnosis is tough. I call all of them quality of life impacting. But it's important for people to understand that it's not just somebody coming to a restaurant saying, I don't like walnuts, so can you please just keep them off? That's a preference. If walnuts, eating that, particularly at larger doses, could potentially kill you, but if not, even just an allergic reaction is miserable and awful and hard to come back from mentally too. That's not a choice. It's just how the body reacts.
And then there's that small subsection of people who say they have the allergy just so they don't have to deal with the preference piece.
That's very frustrating to those of us in the food allergy community because, again, it blurs that line, it muddies the waters, and it makes it feel like if we're being very serious and self-advocating strongly for our safety, then we may get labeled as being ridiculous or, extra or
Or
whatever, but
difficult, yeah,
or
something along,
difficult,
yeah.
right? They're very different things. Yeah.
Now, in some of our earlier conversations, you mentioned how you know, allergy related anxieties can manifest into OCD-like behaviors or even lead to an OCD diagnosis over time. What have you seen between that relationship between those two worlds?
Yeah, so food allergy anxiety tends to be very much focused on phobias or specific fears, right? Fears of death, fears of anaphylaxis, needle phobia, needle fears, fears of, embarrassment of being having an allergic reaction in public. And so that's different than generalized anxiety, where we're
Hmm.
anxious about a lot of different things across a lot of different areas. That's not to say food allergy anxiety can't extend across different domains. It absolutely can. But the connection tends to be that the actions that many people take in response to that food allergy anxiety or phobia can present like OCD like behaviors, right? That restrictive piece, that thought, compulsion, action piece, that also can be very prevalent after an allergic reaction or anaphylaxis. And so now they're tightening up and trying to be a lot more limited in their life because they're afraid, understandably so. They're trying to figure out what happened sometimes, what made them react, and now they're scared again. And so immediately after an allergic reaction, we might see what we might call excessive, like label reading and label checking, again, excessive avoidance. And some of that is understandable just after an allergic reaction. But if it continues and persists, then of course that's going to become problematic behavior that's quality of life impacting and eventually could lead to an OCD diagnosis.
Do you ever get instances where someone with an OCD diagnosis or other phobia diagnosis thinks that they have sensitivities to food, and it's more so just related to their other diagnoses?
Yeah, I haven't personally had that experience with my own patients or clients, but one of my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Paige Freeman, she's a psychologist based in Texas, but she's SIPAC, so she can work across many states now.
Nice.
She does amazing work. So I want to plug her. Amazing work. She uses acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and ERP together to do some amazing work. And so she will see patients that come across like that, where, maybe they've got this OCD diagnosis already in their lives. And then they either adults can be diagnosed with food allergies too. It's not just kids who have food allergies. So maybe it's an adult who then develops a food allergy diagnosis. And then suddenly now, again, they're applying all of those kind of ritualistic thinking and the OCD piece to the food allergy. A lot of times people can fear, even parents can fear eating a food that they know they're not allergic to, but maybe their child is. And suddenly they're starting to think am I having an allergic reaction? Do I have to worry about food allergies developing? Because it's scary.
Yeah, that fear piece is, it's so
Huge.
deeply rooted. Yeah. And
Yeah.
when helping people overcome that fear, you know, we talked about exposure a little bit before, but do you have an example of maybe a client or someone you've worked with over the years where they went from a real intense fear to a much more manageable place through your work together? And what was it in that specific case that maybe was helpful for them as
Yeah.
they went through that process?
So, like Dr. Freeman, I also primarily use acceptance and commitment therapy in my work with the parents. I love CBT, don't get me wrong, but its cousin ACT can be very useful in that acceptance of the diagnosis piece, which I think a lot of parents struggle with, particularly in the early years. And so, through using ACT and some exposure work, kind of broadening those experiences in the safe enough and safe realm, I've seen families come from a place where, they wouldn't eat out. And suddenly now they are eating out and traveling, right? And it's because we have curiously explored what their fears and anxieties were, had them go to the allergist, get some real, grounded information on their particular allergens, along what's safe, safe enough, and not safe. Use that information and applied that to help sort of say, okay, this is food allergy anxiety showing up, telling you it's not safe. We need to be uncomfortable, step outside of that comfort zone safely, but step outside of that comfort zone and have these experiences. And through repetitive experiences, which were hard, but we use our anxiety management strategies through them, they've then built up the ability to use their self-talk and use their experiences as perspective taking to help them keep moving through to do bigger and better things that are going to be good for quality of life. Yeah.
It's incredible. And
Yeah.
I know you have a book coming out.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write the book, and what are some of the things that you hope people take away from it?
The truth is, a friend said to me in 2020 or 2021, you should write a book. And I said, okay, it can't be that hard. And then I soon learned how hard writing a book was. So that's how it came to be. But jokes aside, I wrote this book and it's called May Contain Anxiety, Managing the Overwhelm of Parenting Children with Food Allergies, being published by Johns Hopkins University Press, worldwide in English. I wrote this book because a lot of the information I put in there is information I wish I had had earlier on in my parenting journey, right? I've been at this for 13, 14 years now. And it's information that not only validates that very real emotional experience and mental load that parents have, but it also offers practical tips to finding that balance between fear and anxiety and quality of life. I talk a lot in the book about my goal is to get you off of anxiety autopilot and get you back to mindful parenting, parenting the way you want to, even with food allergies being present, right? We may never get rid of food allergy anxiety completely, but we still can learn how to live a life and parent the way we want to, even with it being around. So the takeaway really is for the parents is to learn to feel heard and seen, validated, and then to learn these practical skills to help them anywhere in their allergy parenting journey, not just newly diagnosed. But I've also heard from allergists, healthcare providers, and psychologists who have pre-read it that it's helpful for them as well because it gives them a better insight into what these families are really dealing with. And then it's useful language to help have these conversations in these appointments and sessions with them.
That's incredible. And if someone wanted to find out more about your work and find you online, where should they go?
Yeah, so I have a resource website called foodallergycounselor.com, and I have articles, old podcast episodes of my own, information about my book and how to pre-order and order it. My private practice website is Tamara Hubbard, LCPC.com. And then also, I'd love to share the resource that I created. The Academy of Food Allergy Counseling is an nonprofit organization that I founded and am now the chief advisor of. And it's bringing therapists together who are food allergy informed or allergic disease informed so that we can strengthen this niche and make more of us. But it also has a directory for families, other therapists, healthcare providers to locate food allergy informed therapists in their state so they can refer them to get the help they need. And that's foodallergycounseling.org.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. I know, there's so much going on in overcoming fear and
Yeah.
finding that way to building resilience that is really helpful for you to break down for us. And I love the nuance you're bringing into the space.
Thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.